January 2025, and Sergeant Spencer Posey is making his way up the mountainside at Glacier National Park in Montana. The wind whips at his face as he slowly ascends.
There's 4 feet of snow. I was there for a week. I saw maybe 10 people in the park. It's desolate, but beautiful, and the quietest place I've ever been in the world.
Most people would avoid doing anything on a wintry January morning in Montana. But for Posey, climbing in these conditions is not only a way to challenge himself, but also to center himself.
Climbing is very mental, just mental strength to face the things that are scary. When you fall, you're falling, and nothing really catches you unless you got somebody strong on belay. Today, the world is so busy, and we're constantly, pounded by stimuli. There's 2 parts of my life right now where I truly feel grounded and at peace. And one is generally when I'm above 10,000 feet and I'm climbing.
But it's more than just that for Posey. It's also a chance to remember what his late father, Roger, taught him.
My dad was a climber, and he climbed Mount McKinley when it was Mount McKinley, Mount Denali. Now it's back to Mount McKinley. He was part of a joint U.S.-Chinese climbing team. Didn't make it to the top because he almost died of hypothermia. When he came back, he said he would go back and beat the mountain. He never did. So when he passed, I took his ashes to Denali, and I put him there. And that meant something to me.
This past January, as Posey climbed the mountain in Glacier, he thought more about his father and his own journey in life.
And when I got up there by myself, it was spiritual, man. Like I cried a little bit. It was just nice to be out there and be in nature and have some weight lifted off your shoulders. And I like that about being up there and out there in nature. It's important.
Roger Posey was a civilian contractor who served with the Army Corps of Engineers in Iraq. When he returned from one of his tours, he got sick, and within weeks, died from a rare form of cancer. Spencer, who was 19 at the time, and a cadet in both the National Guard and ROTC, took the news hard and quickly hit rock bottom. But he was eventually saved from his despair by trips to the gym and a growing interest in physical fitness and nutrition. And today, he's one of the leading researchers and designers of Army holistic health and fitness programs. Over the years, Spencer has learned from and collaborated with many talented officers, including Brigadier General Deydre Teyhen, a trained physical therapist who recently became the Commanding General of the Medical Readiness Command Pacific, and the director of the Defense Health Network Indo-Pacific, that's part of the Defense Health Agency. A skilled practitioner and researcher herself, Deydre has helped guide the health and well-being of hundreds of thousands of officers and soldiers. In today's episode, our hosts sit down with both Brigadier General Teyhen and Sergeant Posey to discuss their journeys toward a healthy lifestyle, how the Army's holistic health and fitness program has already saved millions of dollars and the lives of many, and how carrying around an apple every day makes a big difference. I'm Carrie Varouhaikis, and this is Army Matters.
General Dynamics Land Systems is at the leading edge of predictive and prognostic maintenance with Vitals. Vitals' AI-powered vehicle intelligent tools increase operational readiness rates by leveraging forward-looking, decision-actionable logistics data. With portions already fielded on Strykers, Vitals is compatible with all Army vehicles.
Hello, everyone. I'm Lieutenant General Retired Leslie C. Smith, the 66th Inspector General of the United States Army. And I'm here with my good buddy, my best friend,
Sergeant Major Army Retired Dan Dailey. Les, how are you doing today?
I'm good. Dan, you let me take the lead today. Why is that?
Well,
tell our listeners why. Why?
I was in the office, confident at 07 in the morning in Hawaii, having a cup of coffee, thinking I had an hour to do a podcast.
Okay.
And the reality,
all of a sudden,
I finally look at my phone and realized I was 30 minutes late for the podcast I was supposed to be on.
It's all good, bro.
Good.
It was good.
Right.
Good event.
Mm-hmm.
So, Dan, since you were out on the beach that morning,
yes,
when we were supposed to be working, I'm going to ask you the same questions I asked our guests.
Okay. All right.
So let's get into it. So what's the worst injury you've ever suffered, and what helped you recover from it?
Wow, I almost lost my big toe when I was a young soldier. Had a 5-ton trailer fall on it.
Wow.
And couldn't believe how much blood came out of my big toe.
Your big toe?
My big toe.
Yeah.
And when I went to the doctor, I'm like, Doc, tell me the truth. Am I going to lose my toe? And he goes, well, I don't know. He goes, but he just literally just taped it back on.
And it grew back together?
It grew back together. The bone was broken off and everything.
Really?
Yep. It took months.
Okay.
Well, my big toe. What's your story?
Well, I think probably for me is, when you jump out of a perfectly good airplane, you don't always land right. So I probably had numerous ankle injuries. And then the biggest thing recovering from it is just to stop doing it, which is hard to do, right?
Yeah.
Especially when you're a young trooper and you're supposed to run every day.
Oh, I know. I couldn't run for a while with my big toe.
Yeah, I had to be humbling. You were a private then?
I was a specialist.
Specialist. So you were on profile PT for like...
Yeah, but I went to the field. I mean, I still went to the field back in those days. It happened in the field. I stayed in the field. I went to the hospital and came back to the field. Mm-hmm.
All right, so now you got to tell your listeners, how did you drop a 5-ton trailer on your?
So we were pulling a 5-ton trailer off in Hohenfels, Germany, and you remember the big heavy pintle that you had to lock in place?
Yes.
Well, it didn't, and it when it came off the truck, it hit my foot. And then all of a sudden, it hurt. I was like, oh, man. And
right.
And then I just felt my whole foot getting wet.
Yeah. So like, that's blood.
That's blood.
So the reason why we're talking about this, Dan?
Why is that?
Because last week, I sat down with 2 H2 experts to talk about their own experiences about holistic health. And I know you had a lot to do with that. So you could take a lot of credit for helping to roll that out for the Army.
Yeah, we just started it. They've done, the Army's done quite a bit since then, though, too. And it's actually really moving forward.
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing how long it takes for stuff like that to roll out. And remember, we were talking about that when you were the SMA.
The Army's a big place.
In my viewpoint, it takes 18 months to get something from the headquarters once it's approved down to the units, if it's being driven down.
And it's funded.
Yeah, that too. Yeah. That's the most important part.
Yeah. So let's listen to your conversation with General Deydre Teyhen and Sergeant Spencer Posey.
I think we will, since I was the only one to show up that day. Deydre, Spencer, welcome to Army Matters.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here today.
Thanks for having me. It's awesome to be here, and I'm excited.
This should be a lot of fun. Now, since we're talking about holistic health and fitness, I love to start with something a little different. Tell us, what's the worst injury or setback you've had, and what helped you recover?
Yeah, so probably my worst injury is I actually fractured my spine, right? So I have one of my vertebrae in my lumbar spine collapsed like a pancake. And
wow.
So that's called a compression fracture. And then I had 3 large herniated discs, and that happened from it. It was from a deadlift. As a physical therapist, I help others recover, but then having to recover myself was very humbling to keep pushing yourself to the right level to allow your body to recover, because your body's meant for motion. Motion is lotion. You move it, you lose it, you rust, right? All those things. And so knowing that, I had to keep pushing myself, but at the same time knowing how to make sure I could recover. And so swimming was my friend, and making sure that I was swimming to unweight the spine as I could recover was really critical. And realizing that you can't just wait for it to recover. You actually have to be an active participant in it. But it was humbling to be on the other side of that.
Nice. Spencer, how about you, sir?
All right. So I'm going to knock on wood here, have only had one major injury in my 3.5 decades of life when it comes to physicality. And I tore a hamstring. And I did that because I full-heartedly put a heavy strength day right before a sprint day in my conditioning. And, as most of us in the space know, that's a bad move. So I was doing some sprints on a track, and, as I was turning to go around the corners of the track, I tore a hamstring. And I'll tell you what, that was extremely humbling. How far your mobility comes back when you are unable to use a hamstring. And my mother's a physical therapist. I grew up in her practice, and she was my first call. I'm like, what do I do, right? And outside of the immediate acute things that you can do for an injury like that, it's a lot of rest. You have to dramatically decrease your expectations. It's baby steps. It's getting movement as soon as you get cleared. In little ways. So that was something that was a mental challenge more than a physical challenge, and how it impacted my daily mobility. I mean, just simple things, getting out of bed, putting on clothes. Good night. That set me back quite a bit.
Oh, wow. So your mom's a physical therapist?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Nice. That had to be interesting. So
it was.
Does she know Deydre?
She doesn't. My mom retired probably about a little under a decade ago, but was in the sports rehab space for a long time. And that's how I grew up, in her practice, watching her, put a lot of folks back in the game. It's a noble profession. They take care of people. They're great humans.
And nice. I didn't pay him to say that. I'm just letting you know.
No, it's all good. We know it's a noble profession. So before we get into your individual journeys, Deydre, let's start with you. Can you tell us what you're currently up to? What are you doing?
So I just moved from running the hospitals in the DC, Maryland, and Virginia area. And now I actually run the hospitals in the Pacific, to include Hawaii, Alaska, Seattle, Washington, JBLM, or Joint Base Lewis McChord, Guam, Japan, and Korea. And so just moved out here, and I'm excited for this new mission. And it's good to be back in Hawaii.
So that means you're unpacking boxes. That's what you're currently doing right now.
That's correct. We are on the hunt for all those stickers, right? We are trying to find all those little stickers they put on every piece of furniture and boxes. And the boxes just arrived last Thursday.
Nice. How about you, Spencer? What are you currently up to?
Yeah, so I recently left active duty just about 2 months ago. So, and in typical Spencer fashion, I stepped out of service and I immediately have multiple irons in the fire. I spent about 90 days putting together a literature review for Headquarters Department of the Army on performance standards, criterion-based testing for combat MOSs. So, what does it look like if we were to implement more occupational-based assessments to our combat soldiers, and how could we come about and create the requirements for combat MOSs? So also working with an organization called O2X, which provides health and human performance education services to the military and first responder communities. And then I've joined Frontline Healthcare Optimization, which is an organization focused on educating rural healthcare providers on the American College of Lifestyle Medicine's lifestyle medicine pillars, which are very, very similar to holistic health and fitness.
You are pretty busy. Did you take any time off after you ETS out of the Army?
No, sir.
Okay, I'm going to counsel you later. So Deydre, tell us how a trip to Army Baylor changed your life and the reason why you're here today.
Yeah, so, and I was doing my undergraduate at Ohio Wesleyan University, and I knew I wanted to become a physical therapist, but I didn't know where I wanted to do the training. And I found out about the U.S. Army Baylor program in physical therapy. And unfortunately, I grew up in a part of Ohio where there wasn't a lot of military bases around, and we were just south of Kent State University growing up in the 70s. So it really wasn't even talked about much about joining the military. And so when this opportunity came up, I drove down to Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and spent the day with an Army physical therapist. And I said, oh my gosh, this is what I want to do with the rest of my life. Not only is it the field of physical therapy, but in the Army, we have the ability to be primary care providers for musculoskeletal injuries, meaning that we have direct access. We can order imaging. We can do all the things we would want to do to care for a soldier with a musculoskeletal injury. And it was fantastic. And I left there thinking, if I get to help serve the top 1% of Americans who volunteer to serve our nation, and I get to be a physical therapist, and I get to do direct access, I just thought it was nirvana. And I'm like, sign me up. And I'm just...
Yeah, you were geeking out, right?
I was so excited. Yeah. And it's obviously, outside of marrying my husband, it's the best decision I've ever made.
So let's talk about how and why the U.S. Army has become a world leader in the practice of physical therapy. And we've been doing it for decades now. Why?
So, the profession of physical therapy and occupational therapy actually started in World War I as reconstruction aids. And so basically in World War I and World War II, we supported the Army, but we weren't actually commissioned. And so what really set the profession off was and allowed it to grow to where it is today is in Vietnam. And so what happened in Vietnam, and you think about the number of casualties, the orthopedic surgeons really had to stay in the OR for most of the time. And so they needed help figuring out how the people before surgery were being triaged and how to get them into the surgery. And then those that were recovering from surgery, who was doing the oversight. So they actually had to rely on the physical therapists out of necessity to be their extenders. And so we became physician extenders during Vietnam, and we've enjoyed that opportunity ever since. And when you look at all the leaders in the field, when it stood up, they all had roots to the Army. Nice. And so it's kind of a fun history.
Nice. Okay, Spencer, so your dad worked for the Army Corps of Engineers. Tell us how that inspired your journey to serve in the Army.
2006, 7, and 8, my dad had joined the Army Corps of Engineers as a civilian, and he was in Iraq, in Baghdad. He was chief health and safety officer for the Green Zone. But he went on a personal journey, health-wise, to be able to deploy, and because he was a type 2 diabetic. And I was in high school at the time, and I was playing 3 sports, so I worked out with him. I helped him get in shape to go over to Iraq, and it was about Christmas 2008, he came home for R&R, and that's a long flight across the Atlantic, and he got some blood clots, acquired some blood clots on that flight, which led to a CAT scan and then a diagnosis of stage 4 pancreatic cancer, which is such a terrible disease, which really only presents with symptoms when you're fairly far down the road. So that was Christmas of 2008, and then he passed March 11th. So it was a very quick decline. I got to see firsthand what cancer cachexia does to a human body, and it was terrible. And that really changed my life. I was 19 at the time. I was a simultaneous member cadet in the National Guard and also ROTC up at the University of North Dakota. I had just moved there. I'd been in college for 2 months. And I was across the country without friends and support, and that dramatically changed my life in a negative way. I didn't know how to handle that type of loss and handle all the emotions that go with that, despair and anger and sadness. And I started making some pretty poor decisions, and I circled the drain for a couple of years. And I'll tell you what pulled me out, and that was physical fitness, nutrition, and get myself in shape. And I clawed myself out of that hole through those things. And seeing my own kind of arc coming out of that was awesome. And I saw what it did for me, and it spurred me to my passion of teaching others how to do this, how to take care of ourselves holistically, how to eat right, sleep right. Because when you handle those things, you are way more viable to handle hard things in life, to make good decisions when you have so much data coming in, when resilience is required, when challenges are brought to you. And that is the start of my journey. It started with loss and a very, very dark time for me, but I was able to come out of that through investing in these principles.
Yeah. So, Spencer, how often do you tell that story to people?
Only in recent years have I started to share that. I was embarrassed for a very long time about my past, and the darkness that it put me in, and sharing that a lot of people don't have that shared experience of losing a parent when they're young. That, coupled with, it set me back. It set me back academically. It set me back personally. I was ashamed of that for a long time. And as I started to mature and really understand the power of sharing one's story, and if I help one person with that story, that's enough for me. So it's been a journey.
So Spencer, I lost my dad at 5, so very relatable. I understand what you feel, bro.
Thanks, sir.
Yeah. So Deydre, you were the first physical therapist to serve in Bosnia. Tell us about that deployment and what you learned from it.
So it was very interesting. I was a young lieutenant, and we didn't have many physical therapists deploy in Desert Shield Storm. And so when they were time to deploy a physical therapist, I was in the unit that was deploying. And I remember there was lots of tension. Are you really going to send a lieutenant out there? Shouldn't they be more senior? And my boss, who's the best boss I've ever worked for, to seeing how you actually lead people at the tactical level. Her name was Karen Reed. And she's like, no, we're sending Deydre. She is assigned to this unit. She's going to go. At the time, you had to have 4 vehicles and a crew serve weapon to go anywhere. So although I was excited to be there, we found out that the patients had a hard time getting to me. And so I actually then was hitching a ride to actually go out to all the sites so that I can get to the soldiers. And what I found is that how important it is to treat pain far forward, because the biggest risk in Bosnia at the time was that you accidentally drove over a mine that was brought to the road by the farmers as they found it as the land thawed. And so that by decreasing pain, the people that were actually they had higher vigilance. They were actually able to see those mines, and we could protect more of our own soldiers. And so I fell in love with how important it is to have physical therapists far forward and deployed. And I think I know where you're going, sir, next.
Yeah, hold on. Let me ask it. And that's an important follow-up question to that. And she's just giggling because it must be pretty good. So how did that time in Bosnia help you meet your future husband at the time?
Well, so again, the only way I could get out to these sites was to hitch a ride with the preventive medicine detachment. That was the only way for me to get out there. And I ended up marrying the preventive medicine detachment commander.
Hold on now. Were you checking him out or was he checking you out?
I don't know how to answer that one.
Well, we need to have a follow-on with him. That's pretty cool.
We met during a deployment and fell in love, and we've been married since 97. So it's worked out well.
That's good. So 2 technical people married. That's got to be some interesting conversations tonight. Now, Spencer, can you tell us about your time in the Old Guard and how that led to you becoming an H-2F expert?
The Old Guard is the Army's oldest active infantry regiment. It's a very unique place with a very specific and special mission. And that's to share the Army story with the nation and the world, and to also lay to rest all our brothers and sisters in Arlington National Cemetery. And, when I got there, they looked at me and they're like, man, you're going to carry some caskets. You're a strong guy. So I started in the cemetery, and I did a lot of funerals for our brothers and sisters. And that was a very, very solemn job. And it had a very, very profound effect on me, being a part of that. And I actually, I had a small acute injury. We had a very, very heavy casket one day, and not everybody on my casket team is 6'2" in my height. So I picked up a significant heavier portion of the casket than some of my other teammates, and ended up getting a little bit of a soft tissue injury, which forced me to take a knee for a little bit. And as I took that knee, I looked around the organization. I said, okay, what are the resources we have in this organization to help me holistically get back in the game, to improve my mental health? Because I got to tell you, when you're doing 5 funerals a day, that takes a toll on you.
Yeah.
100%. And I looked around to my soldiers, my privates, my specialists, other NCOs, other officers that were doing this job. And the battle rhythm is very high. And they weren't responding super well because they didn't have a lot of resources. I said, oh, wow, I've been in this space and taking care of people and coaching folks for a very, very long time. So I read the H-2F manual. I said, this aligns with everything I've done outside the Army. I spent about 2 weeks, wrote a standard operating procedure, about 20 pages, and I took it to the brigade commander and I said, sir, this is a gap we have in this organization. I think that we can absolutely improve the way that we take care of our soldiers. And this is how I think we can do this, and we can scale it. And after that meeting, he said, that's your job. And that's all I did for the next couple of years. And it was an amazing journey.
That's so cool.
General Dynamics Land Systems Piranha 10x10 AGM self-propelled howitzer has extraordinary shoot-on-the-move capability. With an L-52 gun that can fire 360 degrees, carrying 30 stowed rounds, the Piranha 10x10 AGM is a production-ready capability that is postured to meet the Army's FY 2030 long-range fires requirements.
Join AUSA, the Army's premier professional association and host of the largest land power exposition in the United States. AUSA is open to everyone, including all ranks and components. So whether you have a relationship with the U.S. Army or simply want to honor those who serve, you can learn more online at ausa.org/join.
Welcome back, everyone, to Army Matters. Now, Deydre, you talk a lot about how small changes can make big differences, especially when it comes to health. Can you give us an example?
So we had a soldier once, and I love this story. He was at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and he really believed it was incredibly important to do 4 years as an American and serve your nation before he went out and went to college. And unfortunately, he was going to be kicked out of the Army because his percent body fat was too high. And we were there and we were telling him about how small changes make a big difference as part of the precursor to H2F, which is called Performance Triad. And we were rolling that out. And he said, maybe I can start doing this. And so he wrote this letter about his journey. And he described how before we told him how small changes made a big difference, he was going to Burger King every day and having a double cheeseburger with bacon, large fry, large soda for lunch. And if he wasn't supposed to have that for lunch, why is there a Burger King on every installation? That was his words, right? And but his first step on his journey was not to stop going to Burger King. He just went to Burger King and had a single cheeseburger, no bacon, medium fry, medium soda. And he started to see the weight come off. And then he went from soda to Gatorade, which probably didn't help him at all, but that was his next step. Then he went Gatorade to water. And by the time he sent this letter to the Surgeon General at the time, he had lost 35 pounds, but his goal was 40 pounds. And so I called him up and I said, hey, what can we do to help you on the journey to lose the last 5 pounds? And he said, I kept making small changes that made a big difference. I've already lost that 5 pounds. I've lost all 40 pounds. I can now stay in the Army, do my 4 years. And so the idea here is that it's all about making the next step where you vote for yourself a little bit more tomorrow than you did yesterday.
Nice.
It doesn't have to be huge, right? And again, he still at first kept going to Burger King. By the end, he wasn't going to Burger King. He was actually eating much healthier, but he didn't start with that. He started with what he was willing to do that just voted for himself a little bit more.
Okay, that's good. So we all know that leadership actions really matter. And you have a story, Deydre, about an apple. What is that about?
I was working with Lieutenant General, now retired, Eric Wesley, and he just arrived to Fort Riley, and his wife, they were staying in the hotel, and his wife bought a bushel of green apples, and he didn't think much about it, but he just grabbed an apple every day, and he would go out to the motor pools and walk around the motor pools, get to know the organization. And by the end of the week, everyone was eating green apples. And he never told anyone to eat a green apple, but they wanted to emulate him. And by the end of the week, they were all eating green apples. We did a study at the Walter Reed Army Institute of Research where we only trained leaders about the value of sleep and the impact sleep has on performance. And then we measured how much the whole unit was sleeping. And we actually found by just training leaders and them talking about it, the sleep for the whole unit improved. If I take it to behavioral health, when the first line officer and first line leader are good, solid leaders that know how to invest in their people, behavioral health rates are almost less than 6%. But when they both are not the ideal leaders, whether you want to put in the word toxic, counterproductive, whatever word you want to put in there, then that number jumps up to about 24%. So I love to share how valuable leaders are in developing the holistic health and well-being and readiness and lethality of their soldiers by implementing the principles of H2F, because when leaders talk about it, soldiers follow, and it makes a huge difference in readiness and lethality.
So true. So Spencer, you wrote a paper that was published last year, which detailed the difference between ROTC, Reserve Officer Training Corps, and younger soldiers from a health perspective. Can you describe it for our listeners in simple terms now?
So we wanted to take a look at different performance metrics and how it relates to ACFT performance before it turned into the
Army Combat Fitness Test.
Army Combat Fitness Test, yes.
Yeah.
And, within the Army, we have certain measures of fitness that we do across the board. But there are other performance metrics that are taken that have a lot of value to them. So we took a whole slew of battery tests on these two different populations. ROTC cadets that were in college that are living that, college student life, but also doing some ROTC, and then some active duty soldiers at the 3rd Infantry Regiment. And we looked at their VO2 max, which is a measure of aerobic capacity. We put them on an incline treadmill. We put a mask on them that measures the amount of oxygen they intake, the amount of carbon dioxide they exhale, and it also watches their heart rate as we increase the incline of the treadmill and also the speed until we get to a relative heart rate max. We also looked at their body composition, so the way that someone eats, the amount of vegetables, the amount of protein, frequency, etc. And we also took measures of their lean body mass and skeletal muscle mass. And what was surprising is that the scores of these individuals, these ROTC cadets and these active duty soldiers, was actually fairly similar. But the metrics of these individuals were quite different. So we found that the active duty soldiers were heavier. They had a higher body mass index, the BMI, but they also had a significantly larger lean body mass or skeletal muscle mass in relation to the ROTC cadets. But we found that the biggest correlations between their performance metrics were VO2 max, which is their aerobic capacity, and also their lean body mass, which is, and I'm going to lean in on the lean body mass for a second. I strongly believe that the increase in skeletal muscle mass is a huge predictor of performance. Because if we strictly look at, let's say, body fat percentage, we can see across different populations that there are sometimes people with low body fat percentages that are not high performers. But I can't ever say I've seen in literature or even in real life application where someone who has a decent amount of muscle has a performance decrease. For me, I took that paper's results and I expanded on that within my sphere of influence and said to these soldiers, hey, building muscle is good and it improves your performance. It decreases your risk for injury. It's never a bad thing. Let's get stronger. Let's get a little bit bigger, not too big, and let's improve our performance.
And one of the things we've been able to do over the years is VO2 max or aerobic conditioning, your results on a 2-mile run are probably the biggest predictor consistently in the literature on predicting musculoskeletal injury risk going forward. Because some people say, well, why do we need to do a 2-mile run? Well, if you have that endurance for the 2-mile run, you then have the ability to have decision dominance when you have to make a decision, right? So when you think about why we do physical fitness, we do physical fitness for many reasons. 1, to wake up the warrior spirit. 2, to make sure you can take on the physical demands of war. But the third is that actually when you are taking on the physical demands on war, that you have enough reserve left over to make a strong decision when needed, right? He hit on the strength part. As the runner in the group, I'm going to hit on the aerobic part. And I think that balance is really what we're trying to get after with H2F.
So Deydre, tell us a couple of ways that H2F can help prevent injuries.
I think one of the things that people don't realize is that musculoskeletal injuries impact about half of all of our soldiers every given year. It results in 10 million limited duty days for the Army alone and about 25 million limited duty days across the Department of Defense. And so there's really kind of 4 ways to do it. But the first one is really to actually prevent the injury. And when we have well-designed physical fitness programs, we've been able to show a reduction in injuries by 33 to 45%. So the best thing we can do.
Have we put a dollar amount to that yet?
Oh, there's huge dollar amounts. Believe it or not, just reducing musculoskeletal injuries by 1% is almost going to save $10 million. Like, you don't have to actually do a huge reduction.
Back up a little bit for our listeners, you and Spencer. Holistic health and fitness does what for the Army? What do we bring together? You talked about the sports and conditioning coaches. What are they doing?
To me, the magic of H2F is the cohesion between these interdisciplinary teams of professionals. As H2F was kind of getting off the ground, there was some confusion about, well, like, do these strength coaches, do they run these sessions? What do the NCOs do? And I believe that we've fixed that narrative, and that those two work together to create the most optimal training programs for these soldiers. And just like you said, ma'am, when you implement a well thought out, progressive implementation of a plan that has, increases, decreases, deloads, all these things, these soldiers are going to adapt and they're going to be healthier. And, I think that when people think about soldiers, they think that they're ready at all times. And that's not just how the human body works. Even professional athletes, they go through different phases of training as they, ramp up to competition and then deload from that. So it's really a collaborative approach. And, I think there is a lot of emphasis on the physical side of the house, but for me, the win is the non-physical side of the house. It's the sleep, it's the nutrition, it's the mental and spiritual fitness that keeps those soldiers in the fight, in their head. And it gets them back in the fight quicker because they have a desire and a drive to be a part of those high-performing teams. That's the magic. And I strongly believe that as we can continue to educate our non-commissioned officers on how to lead these programs and lead from the front and educate the next generation of soldiers, not only does it help the formations, but it helps those individuals. And they go home and they share those things with their families and their children. And we just get stronger. We get healthier as a culture. It's a huge win across the board.
Oh, that's good. So we could talk about this, man, and we'll start to all geek out on like, woo, baby, yeah. But we're almost out of time. So let's end our conversation today with start with Spencer first. So I understand that you were on the stage with the Jonas Brothers. What song did you sing with them, bro?
I didn't sing any songs with them. I think I was.
What'd you do? Just flex on the stage? Like what? What'd you do?
They did give me I would say a large shirt. I usually work a double XL or an XL. Okay. But I was there as part of the Be All You Can Be campaign. It was nice. A Salute to Summer event. I had an awesome opportunity through the Army Marketing Office for NBC to come out to my house to film a day in my life, both off base and on base, about what I was doing with H2F. And then I did a little bit of a tour de force for Army recruiting. And I went out to LA and I spoke to teens and kids at Universal Studios, and went down to Houston and spoke to some folks at a multicultural event, which was awesome. Just sharing the goodness of the Army and how we're taking care of people. And it was amazing to go around to different places and talk to individuals and help stir up the desire to serve for an organization that not only protects the freedom of our nation, but also invests in the individual. That's something I wanted to really get across to these young people, is that the Army invests in you as a person. There are lots of benefits that come with service, and the GI Bill and great healthcare and friends and family and all these things, but they will enter service, they will gain knowledge about how to take care of themselves, their families, their friends, and really be able to move forward from whatever service looks like for them as a better human.
I think that's great. For both of you, thank you for your service on multiple levels. And we're going to have a follow-on conversation, because I think you two especially have the ability to tell the story like other people cannot. And it's very relatable. So I'm looking forward to see Spencer out in Hawaii doing his thing and telling that story and lifting weights at the same time with the troopers at the 25th and other places. So thanks so much again, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
General Dynamics Land Systems Pandur Shurad is a new 6x6 solution for comprehensive short-range air defense. Featuring Moog's Rip Turret and room for robotic system operators Under Armour, Pandora Shurad offers superior protected mobility and proven lethality for the Army's light formations.
As you already know, it's the Army's 250th birthday, and over the last couple weeks, we've received a number of messages from listeners wanting to join the party and send some greetings. Here are a few of them we'd like to share.
Hello, I'm Anai Dennis calling from Washington, D.C. to wish the Army a happy 250th birthday. Hoorah!
My name is Command Sergeant Major Retired Kevin Engler, and I'd like to extend my heartfelt thanks to all those who have served and those who continue to serve in the United States Army. Your dedication, sacrifice, and commitment to our nation are deeply appreciated. Happy 250th birthday to the United States Army. Hoorah!
Know a sharp Army leader who should be shaping our conversations? Tell them to check out the Harding Fellowship. Graduate School, Journal Editor, Real Impact. Learn more at lineofdeparture.army.mil/Harding. To all our listeners, thanks for joining us. Army Matters is brought to you by the Association of the United States Army, the U.S. Army's professional association, member-supported, Army-connected. Visit us at ausa.org for more information or to become a member. Your membership helps AUSA continue to carry out its mission, educate, inform, and connect with the total Army, our industry partners, and supporters of a strong national defense. Today's episode was hosted by Lieutenant General Retired Les Smith and SMA Retired Dan Dailey, and anchor hosted by Carrie Barrow-Heckes. Anthony Del Call is the producer and writer, and Andy Bosnack is the supervising sound editor. Ellen Toner is the content editor. Unzinga Curry is the executive producer, and the senior producers are Carrie Barrow-Heckes and LaSharon Duncan. Be sure to subscribe to Army Matters wherever you get your podcasts, and please leave a review. As you know, we love seeing stars in the Army, especially if it comes in the form of a 5-star review. AUSA's Army Matters podcast can also be heard on Reach Across America Radio on Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern, on the iHeartRadio app, the Odyssey app, and the TuneIn app with the search of the word Reef. AUSA's Army Matters podcast primary purpose is to entertain. The podcast does not constitute advice or services. While guests are invited to listen, listeners, please note that you're not being provided professional advice from the podcast or the guest. The views and opinions of our guests do not necessarily reflect the views of AUSA. For questions or to provide topic recommendations, email us at podcast@ausa.org. I'm LaSharon Duncan. Hope you have a great Army Day. Hooah!